It's time for a massive new project within my LEGO city. I'm finally going to build a giant LEGO airport with the runway itself being over 4 meters long, and I'd say that's exactly what I'm going to start with. There you can see me laying out the frame of the runway, which is of course once again built using the so-called snot building technique, which then furthermore allows me to have all these thin markings just as I've done it with the road, but in this case on a completely different scale. It's going to be absolutely crazy with all the thin markings I'm going to add throughout this video and the upcoming months. Although the main runway is built along the studs, all the little side paths with the taxiways, for example, right there, are going to build using an angle, which you'll see that in a bit, massively regret, because of course all the taxiway markings I'm going to add, I'll have to build in the exact same angle as well, which will be extremely time consuming and extremely annoying. But for now it's time to extend the entire runway along all 11 base plates. This is also the first time you can really get a sense of scale of the entire build. Initially I wanted to have the runway also go at an angle, but I simply didn't have enough depth for the entire build, and therefore, well, I decided against that, which is still more than complicated enough. Having now finally completed the framework of the runway, it's time to start adding details. First of all, with the turning loop at the very end. This is now in case wind directions don't allow airplanes to take off in the main direction basically of the airport. Planes can use that space to turn by 180 degrees and take off in the other direction. There you can also see in detail how I've exactly managed to create that angle. This is also then the only part of the entire airfield I'm going to build using the normal building technique, and as you can see right there, the rest is then snotted, as we like to call it in the LEGO community. All these little holes you can see right there are for LEDs I'm going to add for the lighting of the runway, which is once again another extremely complicated part. The yellow line on top right there, this is the taxiway marking, and then also indicates where the plane needs to turn around should weather conditions not allow it to take off in the other direction. And also this part was so complicated and took me so long to build that I've spared you all the annoying work, and I've simply created these larger puzzle pieces I'm reconnecting right now. These two holes I've prepared right there, where you can still see the studs, are firstly for the arrow indicating where the runway starts, and then secondly, of course, for the number indicating the geographic location of the runway. And these two parts right there are then also where I'm going to switch up building techniques, because specifically with the numbers, this looks much better. Also, the entire thing is now locked into place, which is another side benefit. There you can see how I've exactly managed to create this arrow. I've used cut tiles in this case, which then gives this awesome arrow shape. In the end, the arrow was much easier to build than I expected it to be. And for the number, once again, in this case, the most difficult part was to fill up all the gaps around the edges right there. And now, having tiled everything in, it's time to prepare the lighting. Of course, as I've mentioned it just a second ago, I'm going to add LEDs at some point. This is just in preparation right now, although I have to say all these studs stand up from the runway, which makes it a bit unrealistic, and therefore for the rest of the runway I decided to switch up the building technique and use two 1x1 tiles stacked on top of each other, and this then of course creates a much more realistic and much smoother surface. Now, for the next part, everything is going to be connected via Technic pins and then simply snaps into place. And now this is the part where it really gets difficult, because in order to make everything as realistic as possible, I wanted to recreate the abrasion from the rubber tires and therefore also add some sort of black in the middle. And I'm still experimenting with how exactly I want to build that. Initially, this was my idea to have everything brick built, which is a really aggressive look for the entire thing. However, what I have to say is that the further you move away from the runway, the more realistic and the better it looks. Now, there is in fact another possibility I was thinking about, which might be the most illegal building technique I've ever used. I'm simply taking LEGO tires and now rubbing the tires along the runway, which now creates, as it should be, abrasion. And now this is my question for you: do you prefer the brick build solution or the rubber abrasion itself? Oh yeah, and by the way, the rubber really comes off easily, so you don't ruin your Legos, just to have that said before everybody starts complaining down in the comment section. But I'd say for now, let's continue building. I've started building this next section, but now this is what the entire progress looks like live. Basically, 6 hours of building I've compromised into 30 seconds for you. What took me so long in this case were all the taxiway markings and the indicators for where the planes should land. And I think what's also really visible in this time lapse is how I build something, then destroy it once again, redesign parts. There, for example, these are these angles I was talking about at the beginning of the video, which were the most annoying part, but in the end really look awesome. For the number, of course, since I've used 33 on the other side, at the other end of the runway, number 15 has to be added, and this is probably my most favorite part. everything actually aligns with the Earth's magnetic field, just as it should be, which leaves me with one last thing I have to do for the runway. Of course, the lighting at the end of the runway, as well as on the sides. Now, since behind this section of the airport, the city is going to be continued, I want to have airplanes mainly lift off into the other direction, and therefore I've decided to add red lights in this case, but theoretically we could also make everything programmable and then we could switch out lights. I've now of course also added lights along the edges of the runway. One thing I have to add, where the taxiway is, are all the taxiway markings, which are usually blue lights. In the end, this section is going to look something like this with the blue lights right there. What I of course have to do at some point is add blue lights to the entire taxiway markings as well. And now one more thing I really want to do, also to get a sense of space, is cover up everything with green plates once again. And man, I have to say that I really underestimated how many 16 by 16 plates it's going to take me to cover up this entire area right there. Of course, it's not going to be left like that. At the end of the video, I'll show you how I might actually add another runway in this area as well, and also what I've planned for vegetation. Since I just ran out of pieces, this is what the area is going to be extended to. And now on the opposite side, this is where the terminal and the airport building itself is going to be, which I think I'm going to show you live right now. And what you might notice right off the bat is that the airport building itself is going to be quite small. So only 32 studs I'm going to use for the terminal. This then allows me to simply use all this space right here for the airfield itself. And well, 32 studs for the interior of a building is still more than enough. Oh yeah, and what I was also thinking about is that maybe I'm also going to add train tracks leading into the airport, and then we of course have a small railway station down here, and the rest of the building is then for the airport itself. But this would be a great opportunity to connect this part with the entire rest of the city back there. Now, when it comes to this giant green area back here, I was actually thinking about maybe even adding a diagonal runway, which would then of course be much smaller than our main runway and be built on grass, just as you can see right here. Now, when it comes to this space right here, I of course still have 32 studs remaining I'll use for lead-in lights for the runway itself. And then of course back here, this is where it could get really complicated. Theoretically, I should be able to add LEDs in the yellow markings for the taxiway itself, but I'm not too sure about if this is a good idea. And then I'll of course still need to add stop lines right there, all the indicators for the runway, for the airfield and so on. This is of course then what I'm going to add over the next few updates. Oh yeah, and since quite a few of you wanted me to build something more detailed than an airport right here on the outside of the city, as soon as this part is finished, of course, firstly I'm going to finish the airport, but once everything is connected, then I'm going to throw out the airport, actually maybe find a bigger space in order to also extend the airfield back there, as well as the terminal and so on. And then I'm going to continue the city in a much more detailed fashion as I'm building the airport right here. I think I don't have to tell you that this was up to this point my most expensive video by far, especially with all these green plates, which I, by the way, already have ordered for next video once again as well. But that's a different story. For now, I really hope you enjoyed the start of this new giant project. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Until next time.